Ms. Cunningham, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls criminalist Brandon Stepansky.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat.
Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and your last name.
My name is Brandon Stepansky, B-R-A-N-D-E-N. Last name S-T-E-P-A-N-S-K-I.
Mr. Stepansky, where are you employed?
I work at the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations Crime Lab.
How long have you been employed with the DCI laboratory?
I've been working since 2019.
Describe your educational background.
I obtained a Bachelor's of Science in both biochemistry and molecular and cellular biology from the University of Arizona. And then I went on to get my Master's in chemistry from the University of Utah
When did you complete your formal education?
in 2016.
And then upon completing your formal education, is that when you began your career with the DCI?
There was a moment where I was a research assistant, and then I went on to the DCI.
All right. Now define what your title is at the DCI laboratory.
I am a criminalist, which means we receive evidence, perform our analysis, write the reports, and then as requested, testify.
Are there a number of different units within the DCI laboratory who do various types of testing and/or analysis?
Yes.
Which unit are you assigned to?
I am a dual role, so I'm both in drug chemistry and the trace and arson section.
For purposes of this trial, are we going to be talking about your responsibilities within the trace unit of the DCI laboratory?
Yes.
Now, what type of work do you do in the area of trace analysis?
So I am trained in general unknowns and low explosives.
And can you repeat the last portion of that statement? General unknowns, and what was the other portion?
Low explosives.
Low explosives. All right. Describe the training that you received when you began your career with the DCI to do some type of trace analysis.
Okay. So in trace, we're trained by the module. So each module will have approximately a 3 to 4 months training program, which includes literature review, mentorship, practicals, and then finally proficiency and competency tests.
Were you involved in an investigation here in Davenport, Iowa, which originated as the result of a report of a child named Breasia Terrell who was reported missing on July 10th of 2020?
Yes, but the subject was not known when the assignment came in.
Certainly. When did your assignment come in that would have involved tasks that you perform related to this investigation?
When it exactly came in?
Yeah. Would it have been after March 22nd of 2021 when her remains were recovered?
Yes.
All right. And then what details were provided to you, Ray, I'm going to call it the deceased individual, before we knew who she was?
So we get a receipt form that has a request on it for trace analysis, and we have the items listed. So I had the item descriptions as described by the officer that submitted the evidence.
Okay. What items were submitted for testing?
There were 3 items of clothing and 2 items that were plastic bottles or remnants of a plastic bottle.
All right. Can you identify the clothing items that you received for analysis?
I can.
What were those items?
Item 1 was a shirt. Item 2 was, and may I refer to my notes?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just do this, and this will make it easier. I'm laying a foundation for purposes of discussing a report that you submitted. But Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 56. May I approach?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 56 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 56?
Yes,
How do you recognize State's Exhibit 56?
I recognize the case number. I recognize the report of with my name on it, and it has my signature on the following page.
All right, let's just go through and we'll lay the foundation and then we'll discuss the items that you received. All right, at the top of the document, how is it captioned?
The official report of Iowa Department of Public Safety, DCI Criminalistics Laboratory.
Is there a laboratory case number that is affixed to this document?
Yes,
Is this a number that the DCI laboratory specifically assigns when they receive items for testing from a particular law enforcement agency?
yes.
For the items that were submitted related to the investigation of Breasia Terrell, what laboratory case number was assigned?
Lab case number 2020-16859.
And then is there a report number so we know which report this was in a series of reports that had been generated?
Yes,
What report number is this?
8.
What date did you generate this report?
August 30th, 2021.
And then do you indicate the type of report it is?
Yes.
What type of report?
Trace analysis.
Does your name appear then on the back of that document as the criminalist who did the testing in this particular instance?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 56.
I have no objection.
Exhibit 56 will be admitted.
All right. Your Honor, may I publish this exhibit as we talk about it?
You may.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Stepanski, going back to the items that were submitted to you for analysis, were there more than one submission date? Or was there more than one submission date?
Yes.
Okay, what was our first submission date?
March 25th, 2021.
What items did you receive for analysis?
I received 3 clothing items, lab items 1, 2, and 3, which would be a shirt, shorts, and bra, respectively.
And then what was the second submission date?
March 26th, 2021.
And then what items did you receive there?
2 items labeled lab item 13 and lab item 16. 13 was 1 white plastic bottle, and 16 was pieces of a broken white plastic bottle.
Now, for the March 25th submission, where did those items of evidence come from?
The agency says the DCI.
Well, no, who was the individual that had brought those items to the DCI lab for testing?
On the report, it says Rick Ron.
Look at March 25th of 2021 and read right next to that.
Oh, apologies. Jennifer Pullen with the DCI, or for March 25th would be Mark Bethel, the medical examiner.
All right. So the shirt, shorts, and bra came from the state medical examiner's office. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And then for our submission date of March 26th of 2021, who was the individual then that would have provided those items to the DCI lab for testing?
It's Jennifer Pullen with the DCI.
Are you familiar with Jennifer Pullen?
Yes,
How are you familiar with Jennifer Pullen?
she's a coworker.
As far as you understand, does Jennifer Pullen work on the evidence response team? That's what I'm going to call it, but essentially the crime scene team that would go out and assist law enforcement in the processing of various crime scenes.
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 60, which was previously introduced. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 60. I'm going to give you a moment to look at that report so that you have a perspective of what it consists of. Okay. Who is the author of that report?
Anna Young and Jennifer Pullen.
When you look at the laboratory case number that's assigned to that particular report, is that the same report number that we have on your exhibit?
Yes.
All right. Now, we've had discussions throughout the course of trial about bleach bottles that were recovered or white plastic bottles that were recovered, as well as products of bleach that were being purchased. I want to make it definitively clear as to where the items came from that you received that were the white plastic bottle and remnants. Now, as you look at the report of Anna Young and Jennifer Pullen, do you see descriptors for a white plastic beach bottle, or I should say a white plastic bottle?
Yes.
And then do you also see descriptors for pieces of a broken white plastic bottle?
Yes.
What is the laboratory number that Ms. Young and Ms. Pullen have for the white plastic bottle in their report?
13.
And what is the lab item number that the report of Ms. Young and Ms. Pullen have for the pieces of a broken white plastic bottle?
16.
All right. And so are those items the same items that you would have received?
Yes.
Okay. What was the nature of the request that was made of the trace unit for these items of evidence?
It was a trace miscellaneous analysis request, specifically requesting a bleach, looking for bleach.
All right. Let's talk about bleach. When you consider bleach, are there different elemental compounds to various bleach products?
Yes.
Explain.
So generally there's two different categories of bleach. There's the chlorine-based bleach, and then there's the oxygen-based bleach.
What is the difference between the chlorine-based bleach versus the oxygen-based bleach?
Their active ingredient. The active ingredient for the chlorine contains chlorine compounds, and then for oxygen, they contain oxygen-containing compounds.
All right. Now, if you are asked to look for the presence of bleach on a product, how would you go about that process?
So we have a variety of different tests that we can do, both instrumental and using color tests and pH tests and stuff like that. So we develop a strategy for each individual item, and then we will, to our best ability and to the scientific standards, then go through each one of those steps.
Okay. When these items were provided to you in the trace unit, what request specifically was made of you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
What request was made of you relative to these items? Were you to be looking for bleach?
Yes, specifically.
All right. So then go ahead and then just walk us through those. Well, first of all, let's talk about you formulated a plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Explain what that entails and what decisions were made relative to the testing that you did.
So we look at the item. I look at the items one by one. And for each item, I consider what the matrix is. So in this case, for item 1, it was clothing. So I have to come up with a plan to either analyze the clothing itself or to extract chemical compounds from the clothing and then perform analysis on those extractions. From there, I would determine which instruments or scientific techniques I want to use first, considering which are destructive and which are not. And then I work through the scientific process.
Okay. And then explain to us what you mean when you say you make a determination about the approach to take, depending upon whether a particular approach is destructive or not destructive.
So some testing will consume whatever you're testing. So there's no getting it back. So you want to be careful with how much you use and in particular leaving some for further testing in the future.
Okay. For the shirt, shorts, and bra, and I'm just lumping this into a general category, but was clothing items recovered with the remains also submitted to the DNA section of the laboratory for analysis?
Yes.
Was that something that you were aware of?
Yes.
And so then when you were developing a strategy, is that something that you had to consider?
Yes.
All right. And that being said, when you were examining the shirt, what decision did you make in terms of the approach that you were going to take?
So I examined the shirt visually first, looking for any signs that might indicate an oxidizer or a bleach were present. And then I chose, based on my observations visually, which would be the most likely to contain bleach. So I chose spots that would be representative of the sample.
Okay, so as you looked at the shirt visually, did you see sections in the fabric that suggested that there was a product applied to it that had created the oxidation?
So I will say I noticed lightening of color or discoloration of the shirt. I cannot say what that came from.
Certainly.
But there was discoloration that I noted in my notes.
In the areas where you noted the discoloration then, did you cut samples of the fabric away, or how did you approach that?
Yes, I cut samples, representative samples.
Okay, and then once you chose your representative examples, what was the next step in the process?
So the first step was the X-ray analysis. It's non-destructive, so I could take the actual cutting and then perform an X-ray on it, which would give elemental data. So it would tell me what kind of elements are in the sample.
Okay. Now, before we discuss further what is involved in your X-ray analysis, let's talk about bleach itself, whether it's a chlorine-based product or an oxygen-based product. Is there circumstances under which these products, whether it be chlorine-based or oxygen-based, that there are circumstances that will cause that to break down so that you would not be able to identify its presence through any analysis that you've performed?
Yeah, bleach is capable of breaking down. It's also soluble in water and susceptible to elements, different elements.
So if this particular shirt had been outdoors, subject to the elements of nature, whether it be summer, fall, winter, and spring, with just the different varying weathering conditions, under those circumstances, is it going to make it very difficult to determine whether or not there had been bleach applied to this shirt? Your Honor, I don't think it's leading at all. It's like, would it be difficult?
Overruled.
Yes, I would say the longer a sample is out in the elements, it would be more difficult or less likely to find evidence of certain compounds.
Certainly. So then let's go back to our discussion about the X-ray analysis. Walk us through that process.
So the X-ray is a machine that shoots certain forms of energy at the sample. And then depending on how it absorbs and then re-releases that energy, it gives us information about what elements are in that sample. It's non-destructive, and it will give us basic elemental data. So that means, does it have, in this case, chlorine in it? Does it have metals, magnesium? Gives us that sort of information.
Okay. When you performed the X-ray analysis on the sections of the shirt that you had cut away, describe what you noted.
If I may refer to my notes so I get it correct.
Your Honor, may the witness refer to his notes?
He may.
So for item 1, I took 3 different cuttings. For each of the cuttings, the primary elements that I found were silicon, calcium, aluminum, and iron. There are very small amounts of chlorine in each of the items.
Okay. All right. Then having said that, so there were trace elements of chlorine. Having noted that there were trace elements of chlorine, then can you take that next step or make that next step to say that those elements were in fact bleach?
No.
Okay, and then help us understand what more you would need. If you're identifying chlorine-based elements, what is the difficulty that was presented where you can't then definitively say that it was bleach?
So I'll be careful with my wording.
Sure.
Because I am typically unable to identify bleach in general. I would be able to give a chemical and physical comparison that would be consistent with a chemical.
All right.
However, in this case, and in all cases, my analysis the conclusion will be a culmination of all of my testing in general, not just one item. Very rarely does one testing indicate something conclusively. So it would be a culmination of all of the testing I did, and then at the end of it, be able to rule out everything else and say this is consistent with particularly this, and there's no other explanations. So that would be the difficulty in saying it's consistent with and saying I couldn't find one way or the other.
Thank you. But at least at the X-ray analysis stage, you did identify, are we calling those chemicals?
Elements.
Elements. You did identify elements that are consistent with chlorine.
Yes.
All right. What's our next step?
So then I took an extraction of the sample. So that just means I took, in this case, water. I rinsed the cuttings, and then I took that extract, is what we call it, and I tested the pH of it.
All right. All right. Explain the import of pH when you're testing the pH balance of any type of, I guess, extraction that you've been able to make from fabric.
Okay. So when I say pH, I'm referring to like the acidity or the basicity of a compound. So when you think of that, you think like soaps on the basic side or acids on the acid side. And bleach is typically known as a basic solution. And I did take our known samples of bleach that we had in our laboratory and tested the pH along with it. So I had a baseline of what to expect the pH to be of a bleach solution.
What did you note when you tested the pH balance?
They were roughly around 7, which is neutral or water.
Okay. And would that be consistent with bleach-based products?
No.
No?
Sorry, a bleach-based product would be around a pH of 10.
Okay, all right. And then so if a bleach-based product would be around a pH of 10, again, if we talk about articles of clothing that have been out in the elements for a significant period of time, will that alter the pH balance?
Yes, and to keep in mind that dilution also affects it.
Okay.
So
All right.
I myself diluted it technically by extracting it, but it depends on how much bleach was there to begin with. So there are factors that influence what the pH would be.
All right. If a shirt was subjected to snow that has melted, would that affect the pH balance?
Potentially.
If a shirt has been exposed to rain, is that going to affect the pH balance?
Potentially.
All right. Does sun have any impact on pH balance?
Sorry, what?
Does the sun have any impact on pH balance?
Should not.
Okay, so anything such as snow or rain, that would affect it.
Yeah. I will correct myself a little bit. I suppose with taking into account the sun evaporating certain aqueous solutions or solutions in general, that could affect pH.
All right. All right. Then what was your next step?
I went on to perform color tests on the extracts.
Okay. What are you looking for in a color test if you are trying to determine the presence of bleach?
Okay, so there's a lot of color tests to perform. This one in particular is looking for oxidizing agents. So it is a certain chemical that changes color in the presence of certain oxidizing agents, which bleach generally has. It also changes color in the presence of nitrates, which can be found in soil.
Okay. All right. And then what did you determine when you performed those color tests?
So on the first cutting, there was a very faint blue color change, which the positive bleach sample that I used changes to dark blue.
Okay.
So there was a light blue color change in one of the cuttings comparing to a dark blue.
All right. And if we go back to our earlier discussion, if that fabric has been out in the elements where it's been subjected to snow and rain, would that certainly impact it?
Yes.
Okay. What did you note next?
So I then performed a infrared spectroscopy analysis on the sample. So I dried down the water and then ran the instrument.
And what did you note there?
I was unable to get a very strong match. These instruments' results give you a spectra or a series of peaks and valleys sort of thing. And we compare it to a variety of reference samples in libraries. I was unable to identify anything that matched strongly with the sample.
All right, continue.
That finished my analysis for that particular item.
All right. Now, when we go to the second cutting, walk us through that second cutting and what you noted.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was for all three of the cuttings.
Oh, that was for all three.
The only difference between any of them was with the color test. One of them turned light blue. The others had no change.
I understand now. Thank you so much. All right. So then, based on what you had noted, what did you report by way of findings?
I was unable to identify bleach.
All right. But certainly in terms of just the varying findings that, you were able to establish, were there findings that would be consistent with the use of bleach if that fabric hadn't been submitted to the outdoor elements? And maybe that's not an appropriate way to say that, and you can correct me if you want to.
So I'll explain it so my conclusion states my scientific conclusion of all of this data, which takes into account the different elements that could possibly be in bleach and would be consistent with the chemical or physical components of bleach, but it also takes into account what kind of environment it was in and other environmental effects and ruling out everything else to say that this was definitively from this particular compound. In this case, due to the limited amount of sample or the diluted sample potentially, and the fairly weak results for a lot of these samples, I can't say conclusively whether it was consistent with bleach or not, because there are other elements that could be explaining these factors.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, did you analyze the shorts for the presence of bleach?
I did not.
Or the bra?
I did not.
Explain why not.
So when we were coming up with the initial testing plan, we knew that these samples were going to be, they were, I guess, out in the environment for a very long time. We knew that it wasn't going to be a actual sample like liquid bleach. And with our current instrumental and scientific capabilities, we knew it was going to be difficult to obtain data that would be consistent with for an identification or a comparison. So we developed a strategy in which we tried to find the most likely items, being one of the clothing items, the shirt, and then the bottle that would presume to have maybe held a compound. And with the results that we obtained, we did not think any further analysis would indicate any useful information.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So then let's go ahead and let's go down to the second submission. What was the strategy that was developed for the white plastic bottle and then the pieces of the broken white plastic bottle that came in?
So I analyzed the whole plastic bottle with the idea that it would contain the chemicals longer potentially than a broken bottle that may have spilled and be open to the elements more. So I figured the intact plastic bottle would be protected from the elements more so than the other items. So I chose to analyze that item in particular.
Can I ask a question? When that white plastic bottle came in, did it have a lid on it, or was there no lid associated with that container?
There was no lid that I found.
All right. And then my second question would be this. Was there any contents within the plastic bottle itself, or was it empty?
There was what appeared to be soil and debris on the inside.
All right. So walk us through that same discussion.
So the same strategy applied to this bottle in terms of the scientific steps that I took. The only difference being, instead of taking a cutting and an extraction, I rinsed the inside of the bottle with water and then continued on just like I did the previous item.
Okay. After you had rinsed the inside of the bottle and you were able to collect liquid from it, then did you analyze the water itself to determine whether or not there were any elements within it?
Yes.
Okay. What findings did you make?
I apologize. The x-ray was not done on the water extract of the bottle.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. All right. So what various tests did you perform?
So outside of the x-ray, I did the pH test, followed by the color test, and then the infrared spectroscopy.
Okay. What did you know during the pH test?
It was around a pH of 7.
All right. Color?
There was a light blue color and some fizzling.
Okay. And then what do you mean by fizzling?
It produced bubbles.
Sure. Does bleach produce bubbles?
It can. Yes.
Okay. All right. And then finally, with respect to the infrared spectroscopy. Boy, spell that for our record.
Okay. INFRAED
There we go. All right. And what were your findings there?
Again, I was unable to find a strong match for any of our reference libraries.
Did that conclude your involvement in this matter?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Mr. Waters.
Mr. Stepanski, I'll just cut right to the chase. Every item that you looked at or tested, there was no bleach found on any of it, right?
Correct. I was unable to come to a conclusion consistent with bleach.
Okay, so no compound consistent with bleach was found on any one of those items.
Overall, yes.
I mean, your result says bleach could not be identified on the shirt or white plastic bottle, right?
Correct.
Okay. As part of your profession or your job, are you asked to try to identify bleach often?
Not often.
Perhaps other compounds? Cleaning supplies, are you ever asked to do this?
Yes.
You've done it other than just this case, right?
Yes.
Okay, and the first time or the only time you were requested to test anything in this case was March 25th and 26th of 2021. It looks like you didn't author your report until August 30th of 2021. Is that all sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. And at no point prior to March of 2021 were you asked to test any other item in this case, right?
Correct.
Okay, so those 5 items that we're looking at in this report are the only thing you were ever asked to test.
Correct.
Okay, and who requested these items? Is it just this Mark Bethel with the medical examiner?
It appears there's 2 different submissions. So Mark Bethel would be the first submission of the 3 items, and then Jennifer Pullen would be the following 2 items.
Okay, so those 2 people, did they request this from your agency and this is assigned to you?
Yes.
Okay. And those 2 people never requested anything prior to March of 2021?
From me, no.
Okay. Anybody else in your agency?
I would have to look at the assignments. I know there were several assignments for this particular case.
Okay. Are you the only person who was ever requested to test for bleach?
Yes.
Okay. And you were asked a little bit about, how the elements, sunlight, water may, dilute bleach. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
For example, I mean, you would expect a car, with its windows up to not be exposed by sunlight or water. Would you agree with that statement?
Potentially water, sunlight through the windows, maybe?
Sure. But the point here is that nobody ever gave you like a cutting or a swab of, fabric from a car, right?
Correct.
I mean, You weren't given any other piece of clothing from Mr. Dinkins himself or anybody else? Just so I'm very clear.
I was only given the items of clothing that were in this report.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Stepanski, relative to your findings, you did detect the presence of elements in the fabric that would be consistent with elements in bleach. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, there were elements that could be found in bleach as well.
Okay. And with respect to the pH balance test that you ran, you came up with a pH balance of 7.
Correct.
Bleach would have a pH balance of 10.
Correct. Keeping in mind that water is 7, so neutral.
Right. And certainly the extraction process would dilute the pH balance that you would have engaged in.
Potentially it could. It's a consideration.
And then even being exposed to environmental factors can impact that pH balance, correct?
Yes.
And then finally, as for your findings on the color test, there was a light blue that was noted. With bleach, it would have been a darker blue, correct?
Correct. I do want to specify, though, because we're getting into the specifics of my actual testing, that there are other explanations for these color changes and for the pH. For example, the color change could be explained by nitrates, and there was the presence of soil on the items. So I just want to be very clear that just because it changes colors does not indicate specifically that chemical.
Certainly. And then when you talk about the issue of nitrates, with the presence of nitrates, how would that impact the development of any color that you would see in the fabric?
As far as I know, nitrates themselves would not change the color of the fabric.
No, specifically what I meant is when you're performing a color test, how does the presence of nitrates impact results?
Sorry, I misunderstood. It would change the color to a blue.
Okay, all right. So that's also a possibility as well.
Yes.
So we're looking at at least two possibilities with the color test. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And of course, this shirt had been recovered outdoors, and there was certainly dirt within the fabric itself.
Yes.
Okay, I have no further questions.
You may sit down.
Your Honor, the state calls criminalist Mike Schmidt to the stand.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat.
It's a tight one, Mike, but I think you know that. Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and your last name.
Michael Nathan Schmidt, MichaelSchmidt.
Mr. Schmidt, where are you employed?
I work at the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Criminalistics Laboratory in Ankeny, Iowa.
What is your title there at the laboratory?
I'm a criminalist,
How long have you been employed at the DCI laboratory?
25 years.
Which section of the laboratory are you assigned to?
I'm assigned to the casework section of the DNA unit of the crime lab.
And then do you do analysis on items for the presence of DNA then?
Yes.
Could you describe your educational background?
I attended the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. I received a Bachelor of Arts degree in biology with minors in chemistry and psychology.
When did you complete your formal education?
1997.
All right, and I'm doing the math. So then would you have started with a DCI after you concluded your formal education?
I had a full-time job as a criminalist in the DNA section of the lab in June of 1998, and I've been there since then.
Thank you. When you started with the DCI, describe the training that you received.
I had about 6 months of training by the senior criminalists in the DNA section of the crime lab. Those were people that had been working there for decades. I was trained in the DNA analysis methods, examining evidence for blood stains and semen stains. And also I was sent to a couple of classes. One was at the company that manufactures the DNA kits that we use in the crime lab. They were in San Francisco, California at the time. I had a week-long course in PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, DNA amplification and typing. And I've had continuing education at least 8 hours every year since then, with the exception of 2001 when there were budget cuts.
What is DNA?
DNA is the building block of life. It's found in the nucleus of every cell in your body that has a nucleus. If you arrange it a certain way, the end result is a tree. If you arrange it a different way, you'll have an insect or even a human.
Okay, where do you find, or how do you examine items for the presence of DNA?
In the lab, with some evidence, you can see items that are stained, that have blood stains on them. We look at a lot of blood stains in the crime lab. We also work a lot of sex assaults, and sometimes you can see semen stains with your naked eye, but a lot of times you can't. You have to use an alternate light source or a forensic light to help you visualize the stain. We also examine some items that might have your saliva on them. For example, in burglaries, people leave cigarette butts or pop bottles or beer cans behind. We can swab the mouth area of those items and attempt to develop DNA profile from saliva or cells that are left behind on that item.
Okay, now before we talk about the processing of items for the presence of DNA, first of all, educate us about where we get our DNA.
Half of your DNA you get from your mother, and the other half you get from your father, your biological mother and father. It's passed down to you that way. The sperm cell is going to have half of your DNA, and in the egg that the mother has the other half of the DNA. They come together, and you have the full 48 set of chromosomes that make up your DNA.
Okay, when you receive items in the laboratory to test for the presence of DNA, then how is it that you let me do this. Let's talk about the steps that you take then to process DNA samples.
First, I'll examine the actual item of evidence in the lab, basically looking for semen stains or blood stains most of the time. Then I'll take a small cutting of that stain, put that cutting in a small plastic test tube, and add some chemicals to that, heat it up, and that breaks the cells open, releasing the DNA into a solution that we can use. Once I have the DNA into solution, I'll do what's called quantitation. And quantitation tells us how much DNA is there. The testing we do right now at the lab requires a very specific amount of DNA, a target of approximately 1 nanogram of DNA. So that's why we need to quantitate the samples before we amplify the DNA that is there. The next step in the process is
And then can I ask a question relative to the topic of quantification? So if there is not a sufficient sample, then does the analysis essentially stop there?
Once we start our DNA process, if we do a quantitation, we usually carry it all the way through. Other crime labs in the country, they will stop it if the quantitation is telling them there's not a sufficient amount or there's no DNA there. We are working towards developing that and implementing that, but we are not there yet.
All right. So then after the quantification stage, describe then what's involved in amplification.
Amplification is taking the DNA that's there and making many copies of it. If you imagine a copy machine starting with one piece of paper and then you hit the copy button about 1,000,000 times. So that's kind of what we're doing with the amplification process in DNA. We need enough DNA that can be detected by our analysis instrument.
All right. And then once you've gone through the amplification process, then what's the next step before you start the process of comparison?
We load the amplified DNA onto an analysis instrument, and that instrument measures differences in lengths of fragments of DNA. Basically, we're looking at 21 different locations in a person's DNA on their chromosomes, looking for DNA factors there. And the instrument, most of the fragments are between 60 and 460 base pairs long. And there's a laser in the instrument that can measure differences in length as the DNA travels through a capillary or a small glass tube and passes through the detection window where the laser shines on it and takes all the measurements for us.
Now, Mr. Smith, speak to this particular topic, recognizing that we get half of our DNA from our father and half of our DNA from our mother. I pose the question, is DNA unique to each of us as individuals?
If you look at enough different locations, most people are going to have a different DNA profile. The exception would be identical twins. They're going to have the exact same DNA profile.
Okay, all right. And then once you have developed areas of the DNA to test, then how would you compare DNA of an individual to any locations of items of evidence for the presence of DNA to determine if there is a match?
I will have a printout of the crime scene evidence, the DNA profile developed from a crime scene, and then I'll have another piece of paper with a profile printed out of potential or alleged victims and suspects in cases, and I will do a side-by-side comparison to see if I can either match or make an elimination between the samples.
That being said, I want to direct your attention to a death investigation, specifically arising out of a report of a child identified as Breasia Terrell, who was reported missing in July of 2020, and then we had recovery of remains on March 22nd of 2021. Did Rick Ron of the Iowa DCI reach out to the DCI laboratory to assist in identifying skeletal remains that had been found and then collected on March 23rd of 2021 out north of Clinton? And I know you probably aren't aware of the area, but did he contact the DCI lab to help us identify who those remains belonged to?
Yes.
All right. Now, did you perform a number of different analyses after the recovery of those skeletal remains?
Yes.
As far as your first involvement in this case, what were you tasked with?
First, the body had been found, and they asked the DCI lab to assist in the identification of the body. So the lab received a bone from the remains, and I was assigned with trying to develop a DNA profile from that bone.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit 57. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 57 for purposes of identification. I'd like for you to look at that report and tell me if you recognize that report.
Yes, this was the first DNA report I wrote for this case.
Okay. How is that document captioned at the top in the middle?
Official report of Iowa Department of Public Safety, DCI Criminalistics Laboratory.
Is the lab case number attached to your report that was assigned to this investigation and submissions that came into the DCI for analysis?
Yes, the lab case number was 2020-16859.
And as far as varying reports that were generated by the DCI, what report number is assigned to this report?
Report 1.
What date did you complete your findings and author this report?
March 30th, 2021.
And does your report identify what type of report this is?
Yes, this is a DNA report.
And is your signature attached to this document as the criminalist who did the DNA analysis?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 57.
Exhibit 57 will be admitted.
May I publish, Your Honor?
You may.
All right. In looking at State's Exhibit 57, what we're doing, Mr. Schmidt, is just trying to give everybody a perspective of what came in so that we know what items of evidence that you were working with. Do you have three separate sections showing three different submissions that came in?
Yes.
All right. The first entry, give us the information as to date and what individual with what agency had submitted items and what those items consisted of.
Okay, on March 25th of 2021, Mark Bethel with the State Medical Examiner's Office submitted a shirt, shorts, a bra, and a box containing a left femur bone.
All right. For our next section, what was our submission date for the second item of evidence and who was responsible for that submission?
On March 25th of 2021, Mark Bethel from the State Medical Examiner's Office submitted an item containing tissue from the left leg.
All right. And are we talking about the earlier submission of the box of left femur? Would that tissue have come from that?
The tissue came from the left leg.
Gotcha.
It was in a small plastic test tube.
Okay. And then for our third submission, what is the date? Who made that submission and what item was that?
On March 26, 2021, Evan Obert with the Davenport Police Department submitted the known buccal swab from Aisha Langford.
All right. Let's talk about the known buccal swab of Aisha Langford. We're going to go back in our education so that we can set our perspective. I would represent to you that Aisha Langford is the mother of Breasia Terrell. Now, what is a buccal swab?
Buccal swab is basically a cotton-tipped swab, basically a Q-tip, except it just has cotton at one end of the swab, not both. Now, to get a known DNA sample from someone, an officer, detective, or sheriff's deputy, we'll take that swab and rub it on the inside of a person's mouth against their cheek or their cheek wall. There are a lot of cells present in that area, and that's usually plenty of DNA for us that we can develop a DNA profile from that swab.
When the swab from Aisha Langford came into the DCI laboratory, did you in fact develop a DNA profile for Miss Langford?
Yes, I did.
All right. Now, why did you need to develop a DNA profile from Miss Langford?
In order to make a comparison to the unidentified remains that were found in this case, we do have a DNA database that we have access to. It's a national DNA database, but it contains DNA from crime scenes and convicted offenders. I could, if we didn't know who the person's mom was, we had no idea who the body was, I could put that profile from the body into the database and see if there was a match somewhere. But most of the time, we do ask for known samples from the decedent's possible parents or their children in order to make a comparison. We basically don't want an innocent person's DNA in the database if we don't have to, if we can make an identification in another way. And basically, children aren't going to be in our DNA database.
Certainly. And then did you take the tissue from the left leg and develop a DNA strand from that?
I attempted to, that I was unable to develop a DNA profile from the tissue sample from the left leg.
And then can you explain why?
When a body is left out in the Iowa and seasons pass, that body is subjected to the extreme weather, sun, rain, snow, ice, wind, the heat. If you ever find a dead bird in your yard when you're mowing the lawn, a couple days later it stinks really bad and it decomposes really fast. That's just the way Iowa weather is. Now in other places it's not like that. Like in Arizona in the desert, the bodies dry out pretty quickly and are kind of preserved a lot better than they are here in the Midwest. And so when bodies are subjected to those extreme conditions, they decompose and then therefore, the cells also decompose and the DNA in those cells degrades and eventually gets to the point where we can't detect the DNA that's there because it's been either completely degraded, inhibited, or destroyed.
Okay, so then does that take us to the left femur? Were you able to develop any DNA from the left femur?
Yes, I was.
All right, and describe.
I took a cutting from the section of the femur from the adolescent doe and was able to develop a DNA profile from that. Based on the comparison of the DNA profiles of adolescent doe and Aisha Langford, adolescent doe could not be eliminated as a possible daughter of Aisha Langford. The probability of kinship is 99.9998% as compared to randomly chosen, unrelated, untested individuals.
Okay. Now speak to the language that you've used in your report where you indicate that she could not be eliminated as a possible daughter. And this is just for sake of discussion. Let's assume for sake of discussion that Aisha Langford had 3 daughters. When you report this type of finding, what is the import of this type of finding if she were to have 3 daughters?
I would need the other 2 daughters to determine if she could be included as a possible mother of those 2 daughters. I can say that Aisha Langford is definitely included as a possible mother of the unidentified remains in this case.
Okay. Were those findings then reported to the state medical examiner's office?
Yes.
And then so with that, since Aisha Langford was identified as a biological mother of this female child, would that then require the state medical examiner's office to obtain dental records to make a definitive determination as to which female child these skeletal remains were?
Yes. My role is to develop DNA profiles and do the comparisons and issue my report. In body identification cases, the medical examiner or state medical examiner has jurisdiction over the body. They are the ones that ultimately make the identification decision. Even when we have a match in a database, we still issue our DNA report to the medical examiner, and they decide whether the body has been identified or not.
Okay, let me go ahead and take that exhibit from you, and we'll go on to the discussion of our next report. How many reports in total did you author?
3 for this case, 2 others on a cross-referenced case.
Okay, and we'll set the discussion aside for the cross-reference case a little bit later on. We've had discussions about that. But as far as your second report, Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 58. I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 58 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize State's Exhibit number 58?
Yes.
How do you recognize State's Exhibit 58?
This was a DNA report that I issued on April 19th of 2021.
And in this report, what is it that you will be speaking to?
This was the shirt, shorts, and bra submitted by Mark Bethel from the medical examiner's office.
All right. Your Honor, well, let me ask you this. What report number is this?
5.
Does it bear the same lab case number?
Yes.
What date did you generate this report?
April 19th of 2021.
And again, does it identify the nature of the report that you authored?
Yes, it's a DNA report.
And does your signature appear at the back of the document as the criminalist who did this analysis and generated this report?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 58.
No objection.
Exhibit 58 will be admitted.
May I publish, Your Honor?
You may.
All right. So as we look at State's Exhibit 58, then are we simply focusing on the 3 items of evidence for that first submission that we saw in the earlier report?
Yes.
Okay? And for purposes of our written record, just establish that again.
This was a shirt, shorts, and bra submitted by Mark Bethel from the medical examiner's office on March 25th, 2021.
Okay. Now, describe the type of DNA analysis that you were doing on these articles of clothing.
These articles of clothing, I was screening for evidence of sperm or seminal fluid, basically sex abuse type evidence.
Okay. Mr. Schmidt, can you speak to the impact of environmental factors if, in fact, there was sperm or seminal fluid on an article of clothing that had been located outdoors over the course of multiple seasons?
The chances of me being able to develop a DNA profile from that type of item, if it's left outside in Iowa weather for multiple seasons, are pretty slim for me developing any kind of DNA profile from it. The reason I was able to identify or develop a profile from the bone for this case is because the DNA is basically a lot more stable in bones in bodies. The DNA is trapped in the crystallized calcium structure of the bone, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to release the DNA out of those crystallized, hardened, calcified bone cells.
All right. Can you also speak to the topic of bleach? How would bleach impact the ability to detect sperm or seminal fluid on an article of clothing if it was poured over that clothing?
Bleach, it destroys DNA. We use a solution, 10% bleach in our lab to clean our work areas. And that's just a 10% diluted bleach solution, but that's good enough to clean our working surfaces, to clean the surfaces of any DNA. That way we're not contaminating items in between examinations.
Okay. All right. So walk us through your findings in this particular case.
I attempted testing on 2 stained areas of the shirt. Both screening tests were negative for seminal fluid in those areas, and I did not find any sperm microscopically in either of those samples. I attempted DNA analysis on the sperm and epithelial fractions for both cuttings. I was unable to develop any DNA results from the shirt.
I want to stop you right there. Now, you have mentioned 2 terms. You talk about the sperm fraction. It's obvious, but define.
When we look at a sample that contains seminal fluid or possibly contains seminal fluid, we attempt to separate out 2 different fractions from that sample. In the end result, we're going to have, or attempt to have, 1 tube that has DNA from skin cells or blood or saliva. And then in another tube, we're going to have just the sperm cells or DNA from sperm cells that are there. Our lab calls those the sperm fraction and the epithelial fraction. Other forensic labs call those the forensic 1 fraction or F1 and the forensic 2 fraction or F2. It's just a naming thing. Just because I call the sperm fraction doesn't mean it contains sperm there. And that's probably why the other labs call it an F1 fraction, because it doesn't always contain sperm.
Okay. And so then that explains the difference between sperm fraction and the epithelial fraction.
Yes.
All right. Now, let's also speak to this term, spermatozoa. Tell us what you mean by spermatozoa.
Spermatozoa is just a plural for sperm cells. If there's just 1 sperm cell, then we'll call that a spermatozoon. If there's 2 or more, then we will say spermatozoa.
Okay, then let's go back and let's circle the wagons and start where we were at before I had you give us those definitions of a sperm fraction versus an epithelial fraction.
Okay. I was unable to develop any DNA profiles from either the sperm or epithelial fractions of both samples from the shirt. I also tested a stained area of the crotch liner of the shorts and a stained area from the seat area on the interior liner of the shorts. Again, for those 2 samples, both of those samples screened negative for the presence of seminal fluid. I did not find any sperm in either of those samples, and I was unable to develop DNA profiles from the sperm or epithelial fractions of both samples.
I want to make sure that we understand what you're saying. All right, when you say that you were unable to identify any sperm as being present, again, if clothing is outdoors and is subjected to the elements, will that destroy the sperm?
It can.
All right, so then when you say that you were unable to identify sperm, do we have to consider the environment within which those articles of clothing were located and what they had been subjected or exposed to?
Yes.
Okay, continue.
I also examined a bra that was found in 2 pieces. I attempted DNA analysis on the interior cups of the bra. I also screened the cuttings that I took from the cups of the bra. Both of those screened negative for seminal fluid, and no sperm were found in either sample. And then again, I was unable to develop any DNA profiles from the sperm or epithelial fractions of both of the cup samples.
Okay, are these findings consistent with what you would expect to find if you had articles of clothing laying outdoors through a summer, fall, winter, and spring month?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about your third report that you generated. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit 59. I'm handing you State's Exhibit 59. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 59?
Yes.
How do you recognize State's Exhibit 59?
This was the DNA report that I issued on July 29th of 2021.
Okay, and again, does this contain the same lab case number that you've previously referenced?
Yes, 2020-16859.
What report number is this?
7,
What date did you generate the report?
July 29th of 2021.
What type of report is this?
This is a DNA report.
And does your name appear on this document as the author?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 59.
No objection.
Exhibit 59 will be admitted.
Your Honor, again, may I publish?
You may.
What was the nature of the submission as noted in State's Exhibit 59?
This was an additional submission from Mark Bethel with the State Medical Examiner's Office. On June 30th, 2021, Mark submitted fingernails, or apparent fingernails.
Okay. Now, what type of fingernails did you say that he submitted? Did you say parent fingernails? I'm not sure that I understood you correctly.
Yes, I couldn't determine if they were real fingernails or the fake fingernails.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. What was the nature of the request then that was made for the fingernails that had come from the State Medical Examiner's Office?
Just if I could develop any DNA profiles from the fingernails.
Okay, and then describe what you were able to determine or not.
I was unable to develop a DNA profile from the swabs of the fingernails.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and take that report from you. I'd like to set the stage for our further discussion. Now, were you asked to do DNA analysis on some items of evidence which would have included like a child's white medium tank top as a result of a murder that DCI agent Rick Ron was involved with? It was a a completely separate investigation from the investigation of Breasia Terrell.
Yes, there was a separate homicide from Clinton County that the DCI was investigating.
Okay, and I think what I'll do, what's our last example? Your Honor, may I ask what our last exhibit number was, our highest exhibit number?
It would be 156.
156, thank you. Make a note that we need to put that on our, okay. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what has been marked as State's Exhibit 157. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you State's Exhibit number 157 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 157?
Yes,
How do you recognize State's Exhibit 157?
this is a DNA report that I wrote January 21st of 2023.
All right. What is the case number associated for this laboratory case number?
The DCI lab case number for this case is 2020-17232.
Is that a completely different lab case number as compared to the lab case number assigned to the Breasia Terrell case?
Yes, it is.
All right. So then let's just go back. For the Breasia Terrell's case, what was our lab case number again?
2020-16859.
All right. Now, by virtue of that homicide that had occurred in Clinton, was the lab doing a number of different analysis based on submissions that came in through that case?
Yes,
Okay. Was some of the evidence collected in that investigation turned over to Davenport just to submit to see if there was any connection at all with this case?
yes.
All right. And then as we look at this, what date was this report generated again?
January 21st of 2023,
What type of report?
a DNA report.
Does your name appear as the criminalist on this report?
Yes,
And does this set forth a listing of items that came in through Davenport asking you to test?
yes.
Your Honor, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 157.
No objection.
Exhibit 157 will be admitted.
Okay. May I publish, Your Honor?
You may.
All right. Now, I'm putting forth State's Exhibit 157 under the Elmo. If you could, let's again go back to the section of the report that gives us a date, who the submitting officer was, and a description of the items that came in.
On November 28th, 2022, AJ Poirier with Davenport Police Department submitted a Hanes crew-style white medium t-shirt, one children's white medium tank top, and some hairs sealed in tape.
All right. If the body in this particular case was recovered on March 22nd or discovered on March 22nd of 2021, then this report was authored when?
January 21st of 2023.
All right. And do you know when that particular homicide took place?
I do not.
That's okay. When these items came into the laboratory, what were you asked to do to see if it had any tire connection to the Breasia Terrell investigation?
There were some small shirts, child-sized shirts. So I was just asked to see if there was any DNA that could be either eliminated or matched to Breasia Terrell and Henry Dinkins.
Okay. Was there some type of blood or other bodily fluids on that child's t-shirt?
Yes.
What was it?
There was blood on the child t-shirt in 3 stained areas, DCI item 2. I was able to develop DNA profiles from those areas. The DNA profile developed came from a male source. And later on, Henry Dinkins was eliminated as the source of the DNA profile, and Breasia Terrell was also eliminated as the source of the DNA profile.
And so the male source, how is he designated in this report?
Male A.
And has male A been identified to date as who the contributor would be?
No,
for that blood on that child's T-shirt.
no, he wasn't.
Did that conclude your involvement in this matter?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Waters?
Mr. Schmidt, you were asked a line of questions about how the elements, sunlight, rain, snow, whatever it may be, is or has the ability to destroy DNA. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
Okay. So you would agree then that those elements can destroy DNA, sperm, whatever it may be?
Yes.
Okay, isn't it just as explainable that there was just never sperm or DNA on those shirts?
Yes, I did not find sperm on those shirts, so that's a possibility. Yes.
Wouldn't that just be the easier explanation?
You could go either way on that.
Sure.
There's no way for me to know that. I can only say that I didn't find anything there.
Yeah, and that's fair. I'm not trying to trip you up, but then what we just talked about, those shirts, I think it was found from a black Challenger, a car, right? Do you remember that?
It was found in a car. I know
Okay.
that.
And I think it was just maybe one shirt or two shirts.
Two shirts.
And was blood visible on those shirts?
Stains were visible to me. It didn't look like blood, but it did screen positive for blood. Could have been vomit. We don't have a screening test for vomit. It could have been diarrhea. There's just, all I can say is the stain screened positive. The stains screened positive for blood.
Sure. And then your assignment with those items that we just looked at was simply to test or compare the DNA from male A to Henry Dinkins and Breasia Terrell. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's right.
Okay. At no other time did somebody request to look at any other person of interest other than Breasia Terrell and Henry Dinkins?
No. Had I developed an unidentified male profile from Breasia's clothing, especially if it came from a sperm fraction or sperm DNA, and Henry Dinkins was eliminated, I would have put that profile into CODIS because there shouldn't be sperm on a child's clothing. That would at least be an act of sex abuse. And so that profile would have been put into the database and would have eventually been compared to suspects throughout the nation. So it's just that in this case, I was only given knowns from two people.
Sure. And male A, we don't know who that is.
That's right.
Okay. That's all I have.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Schmidt, do we also have to recognize that you didn't find Breasia's DNA on any of the articles of clothing?
That's right.
Okay, and I'm talking about the articles of clothing to include the shirt, shorts, and bra that were found out in the elements on March 23rd of 2021.
Yes, I didn't find her DNA on any of the clothes from either of the cases.
Okay, and so under that circumstance, again, presumably if an individual's wearing clothing, is there going to be a transfer of our DNA on that clothing?
Usually, yes.
All right, and with those articles being out in the elements, does that help us to understand why you would not be able to identify any of Breasia's DNA on those articles of clothing?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
You may sit down.
Thank you.
Your Honor, this is all of the evidence that the state has to offer at this time. As we indicated yesterday, Detective Hammis would be our last witness, but she's going to take a significant period of time, we think.
All right. Thank you very much. I wouldn't, is the defense asking that we start at 9:30 again on Monday?
Please.
We will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have finished up. No, the gal at the belly dance festival definitely wasn't in a green dress. She was some young blonde chickie poo, and we were in full tribal costume, and nothing much to see. So they didn't zoom in on us. They just showed us a long shot. Oh dear. And I remember that I didn't want to tell anybody at work that I was taking the day off for the belly dance festival because I didn't want to get a hard time, and I went to work the next day, and one of the people says, "Oh, I saw you on the news." And then I went to my best friend's wedding, and one of the people at the reception says, "Oh, I saw you on the news." And then they had an arts festival up in Park City, and somebody stole the footage from the belly dance festival for the commercial, and so we were on that commercial too. So so much for my big secret from work about being at the belly dance festival. So that was a big fail, but hey, I was young and cute back then, so yeah, they destroyed any alibi I had, right? So, okay. I'm trying to think, was there something that I saw that needed to be mentioned before we go off for the weekend? Seems like there was something, but oh, an interesting video just posted from Well I Never. It says Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, the Lambeth Poisoner, and Jack the Ripper. I'm going to have to watch that one. That sounds interesting. Okay, I'm not seeing anything about the jury and Quanisha Johnson. I'm assuming that the jury is deliberating, but I really don't know. I guess we could take a quick look at Twitter. Where's my Twitter tab? Okay. Let's see. Somebody asked a question on Twitter about Quanisha. It says, why didn't the police keep them separated? I've never heard of a domestic violence case where the police send both people back into the house together. That's an excellent point. I mean, we saw in the Gabby Petito case that they sent Brian off to a hotel and she stayed in the van. So They're taking over your Cheetos. Mmm. These are not the snacks you're looking for. I love that. I saw some the commercial for the new Star Wars things. I'm not sure if that is in the movie theater or on Disney. Yes, I know my Star Wars well. I spent a lot of the summer of '77 at the movie theater watching Star Wars over and over again, and who memorized the script down to the intonation. So some days we saw it five times in one day. Of course, our minds would be kind of blown by then. I was watching something on music analysis, and they were going over some of the thematic music. I thought it was from the first Star Wars movie, and I went, man, it's been a long time. I need to go back and watch this because I don't remember that shot and that shot and that shot. And then I realized, oh, this is Rogue One. So, okay, let's see what else they have to say about Quenisha Johnson. Oh, it says bombshell development. Defense wants to include a potential witness who popped up on Instagram Live. Can they do that after they've had closing arguments? I mean, I've never heard of that. We've got one person who says this could, let's see, let Quenisha Johnson get away with murder. It's not reasonable to shoot and kill her boyfriend for abuse. And then 2 comments later, somebody says, that Quenisha Johnson case is so sad. I hope she's found not guilty. Jury deliberations began. And 39 minutes ago, somebody posted they want to have a defense wants to post another witness. Is this after the jury started to deliberate? Yeah, I saw that yesterday, and quite frankly, considering how difficult she is, I don't think they're going to find any lawyer who is going to meet with her satisfaction. And I'm wondering if that's something that she is doing deliberately to try to keep delaying justice. Oh, I saw that about the drunk teacher. I saw a couple things on that. Okay. I don't think so. I've never heard anything like that before. I mean, once the case rests, I think it's over. Let's go back and take a look at that. It's from Court TV. It says bombshell development. Let's take a look at that. Okay, just a sec. Let me get this set up.
Court TV Live, I'm Terrell in for Julie Grant this morning as we round out another weekend. What a week it has been here on Court TV. We're going to begin the hour in Georgia where jury deliberations began about 40 minutes ago. You see the clock ticking away on your screen in the self-defense or murder trial for Quenisha Johnson. We've been watching this one all week, and people have very strong opinions on what to do with Quenisha Johnson after she, the 30-year-old defendant, admitted to killing her boyfriend. She's facing multiple charges, including a top charge of murder stemming from the shooting of her boyfriend, DeMonte Smith. Last November, prosecutors alleged that Johnson premeditated this, that her actions to shoot Smith were very deliberate. They had a disagreement. She went to her vehicle, got her car and a tire iron, and he ended up dead. The defense says now this is a woman who needed to protect herself from a serial abuser. We'll see what the jury does. The jury's only been at it 40 minutes. We've already had a development in this case. Let's bring in Julia Janae. She's at the courthouse. And Julia, yesterday we saw this back and forth between Michael Sterling and the judge trying to find this other potential witness. That there's this woman that allegedly suffered some sort of abuse at the hands of Mr. Smith. And now this morning, Mr. Sterling has an update and has presented that to the judge. What can you tell us?
Right, Ted. We're sitting around waiting for the jury to tell us something to see if they may have a note, but the movement or development is something that the defense may want to reopen evidence for in this case. So the backstory of that 911 call, and the defense wanted to get it in. They played it for the judge. It shares some information from 2018. A young woman named Destiny Atkins who called police. Take a listen to that call and the reason why the defense now may want this jury to be pulled out of deliberations.
Tell me exactly what happened. My baby father came in here and beat my ass, hit me on my face, calling me a bitch because he got mad. I put him out. And he said, I'm not safe here. He said, as soon as the police leave, he's going to come back and kill me. It's exactly what he said. And he already punched me in my face. No, he just slammed the house. I told him I was calling the police. And he said, as soon as he's done calling them, I won't be here. I'm coming back and I'll kill you. Okay. Any drugs, alcohol involved today?
Now, the judge said that call couldn't come in, but the girlfriend could be brought in if the defense wanted time to look for her. They said they were having the hardest time and just decided to move forward, Ted. So this is a development that they may have more information about that young woman.
Yeah, okay. Julia, we're going to actually go into the courtroom where Michael Sterling is presenting what he has found out this morning about this woman who, from the defense standpoint, obviously is a game changer. If the jury were to hear her story, it increases the potential threat level for Quenisha Johnson in the juror's mind. So let's listen to Michael Sterling talking to the judge about the person they'd love to present to the jury, but they just can't find her.
So, Mr. Sterling, can you give the court somewhat of a timeline, and you don't have to name the parties or where you obtain this information, but a little bit more details?
Yes, Your Honor. Judge, I received some credible information this morning.
And when you say this morning,
Approximately 30 to 45 minutes ago, that the moment I rested my case, Ms. Destiny Atkins suddenly reappeared on a Instagram Live. It's my understanding that she talked about the case, and I received information that she had been in touch with DeMonte Smith's family, and that there may have been some suggestions, some tampering in terms of her making sure she would not appear, would not show up, would not respond to any subpoenas basically avoiding us. There was some suggestion, some suggestibility. I don't know the details, which is why I'm bringing it to the court's attention, just because I just received this information 30 to 45 minutes ago. To the extent, Judge, that I can still have my investigator go out, find her because she's reappeared. She's posting on Instagram Live now. I'd like to try to get my investigator to subpoena her, to bring her to court at some point today, put her on the stand, get her on the oath, and find out and inquire as to whether she was in touch with individuals from DeMonte Smith's family, whether they were tampering with her in terms of telling her not to cooperate or encouraging her not to cooperate or doing anything in terms of interfering with this trial. And if so, I'd like to, and even if they weren't, Judge, if we get in touch with her, I would be making a motion to reopen the evidence because the court did say that we could put her on the stand to talk about specific things that were relevant and important to this case. But if she disappeared and then reappeared as soon as I rested my case, then I think even if there was no tampering, we would get in touch with her. I'd be making a motion to reopen the evidence, specifically to bring in those things that the court said we could talk about with her. And I just wanted to make a record of it. I did make the prosecution aware as soon as I became aware. And there was some credibility behind it. I made the prosecution aware as well, Judge.
Okay, and so with Instagram Live, is, to your knowledge, is that public and does it remain up or can it be removed?
I think Instagram Live, it's public when it's live, but it can be removed. Like someone can delete it, but there may be, later you probably can subpoena the records from Instagram or get a warrant to find out what happened. But it's public when it's happening because you're live. You can save it and leave it in like your stories on Instagram, or you can delete it right after your live finishes.
Okay, Mr. Shaw?
Judge, Mr. Sterling did make me aware of this, and I was going to look for Ms. Gatko to see if she was here. But I did ask Mr. Sterling if the Instagram Live was about the trial. I don't think he knows, but his investigator might, or whoever saw it. The state's response to that would be, I have no problem with Mr. Sterling trying to subpoena her again now that she has allegedly reappeared, and having her come testify to whether there was any tampering. As far as reopening the evidence goes, Judge, I would have an objection to reopening the evidence if there was no tampering, specifically.
Okay, so I am going to allow the jury to continue to deliberate because at this point there has not been any sworn testimony, and I understand, Mr. Sterling, you're an officer of the court. So I will give you all an opportunity to see if you can locate this particular individual, and if you need the court, if you can make, depending upon what your investigator finds, and if you put your investigator on the stand and there is an appropriate showing, then the court, if necessary, will sign a material witness warrant.
Yes, sir.
And we will go from there, depending upon what occurs as to whether we get to the point of reopening the evidence. But as I indicated, at this point, I'm going to continue to allow the jury to deliberate. And you can make every attempt and efforts that you can. We'll address it if we get to that point.
Thank you, Judge. I just wanted to make sure that I made the record to preserve it for my client's sake.
Okay, and so I guess you all can be researching the issue and in terms of would it be permissible or impermissible for the court, and I believe it would be within the court's discretion to reopen, but you all can research the issue if it becomes timely.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Judge.
Yes, Judge.
But I do need you to look at the jury instructions Mr. Shaw has indicated that the state doesn't have any objections, except I just need to write out a little bit more of one of the charges that you all agreed to, and I'll make copies of that upon approval of both sides. And then we'll send it back to the jury. Mr. Sterling, just to place on the record, Ms. Johnson was present and Mr. Shaw, but the court, given that the court read to the jury the jury instructions yesterday, the court at approximately 8:14 a.m. this morning directed the jurors that they could begin their deliberations having the indictment as well as the evidence that you and Mr. Shaw agreed upon to go out back with the jury in the verdict form. So they began deliberations at 8:14 a.m. this morning without having a copy of the jury instructions. And so I told them to proceed, even though they did not have that, given that the court gave the instructions to them yesterday. So as soon as you look at that, then I have informed the jury that they will receive the instructions.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Do you have any objections?
I don't, Judge. I do not.
And Mr. Sterling, the reason that the court elected to do that is because, as you are aware, yesterday the jurors had taken a vote.
Okay, little matter with the jury instructions there, but bombshell, a development this morning. The defense has located this witness, Destiny Aikens, that they would have loved to have had come in and authenticate a 911 tape. Because let's face it, if the jury hears that 911 call, that Destiny Aikens believed that DeMonte Smith was going to come back and kill her, that's a game changer in this case. So Michael Sterling is still looking for her. She popped up on Facebook Live or Instagram Live after closing arguments yesterday. He wants to possibly reopen the case to add more evidence in. Marie Pereira's with us, so is Greg Isaacs, two wonderful attorneys to have with us that can parse this out. Greg, to you first. What do you make of this development here? And if they find her, Destiny Aikens, and the allegation here is that the Smith family got a hold of her and said, you better not respond to your subpoena. How big of a difference could this make?
Well, it really handcuffs the judge because, Ted, they're not five quarters in football. There's not 10 innings in baseball. And, I mean, legally, once that jury begins to deliberate, the proof is closed. So that's a very unusual request to make. Now, if I'm the judge, I'm going to sit there and go, well, this may be a basis in the motion for new trial phase to say that we had newly discovered evidence, there's a problem, we want a new trial. So it really creates an issue that can create some gridlock and chaos as this case goes forward. But I didn't hear that they found her. I heard that she had made an appearance on Instagram. And, Ted, let me tell you my experience. Issuing a subpoena ducis tecum to Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is almost like issuing a subpoena to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You get no, hell no, and then sometimes they comply. So, if I was Sterling, I would want to be able to demonstrate that I worked diligently to find this witness before. But just because you see a reference on social media, I don't think it's enough to reopen a trial. I don't think you can reopen a trial when a jury's deliberating. And it'll be interesting to see what happens if she's convicted in the motion for new trial.
Yeah, they need to find a location, and the judge said she'd be willing to issue a material witness warrant to get her in. But Marie, is it too little, too late scenario? Obviously, you still pursue it, right? Because to Greg's point, there could be a guilty conviction here, but there's a lot to happen after that, if indeed that happens, including an appeal.
I think it's never too much to pursue every avenue for your client to zealously advocate for everything under the Constitution, especially we're talking about a murder case here. But I'm not sure that this witness is going to be the smoking gun witness either way, unless, as Greg said, they can prove that there was some type of tampering, and then it would be relevant, because if some of the witnesses who testified on the behalf of the prosecutors were witnesses who actually tampered with evidence, it would actually ruin their credibility. But as far as a prior bad act by the victim, we already know that he is a person who threatened to kill her, who threatened to hurt her and beat her gluteus maximus off. We understand that already. So I don't understand what bringing this person in to say, well, he threatened to do the same thing to me, how it's going to consequentially impact the jurors, because the state already concedes, yes, he threatened to beat her. They're not denying that.
Yeah, I mean, I would think from a juror standpoint, if there's another person that comes in with a similar tale, if I had some reservations about the believability of the defendant on the witness stand, this might shift it a little bit. I mean, I can definitely see why that they would want that in front of the jury. We'll see where it ends up. We need a break here. We're going to, as they continue to deliberate, you heard the judge say that they're back there without the jury instructions. Michael Sterling is looking at those, and they're going to get those. And then they'll continue their work. They're about an hour in, and this could be a long deliberation process, depending on where everybody is.
Okay, well, that's certainly something I've never encountered before. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Let's see if there's anything else on Twitter. Sounds like the jury wanted to watch some videos in private, but the judge said no, they'd have to do it in the courtroom. Got another person who's saying, the story's so sad, the system is really failing DV victims. Well, that may be, but I don't know that. Okay, maybe it wasn't murder, but maybe it was second-degree murder or something, but you don't care for how BK is being a nerd for going his right to a speedy trial. Well, I saw that one coming. They to go for a death penalty trial in so soon after being charged, no, that's not going to happen. Well, I think I'll keep an eye on what's going on with Quenisha Johnson's trial, and if anything interesting happens, maybe I'll pop in again. But otherwise, I think maybe it's time to wrap up. So, okay, well, it's funny to think we're done so soon, but I'll keep an eye on what's going on with Quenisha Johnson, and we'll see what happens. Okay, you're wide awake. Oh no. Let's see. Oh, hey, here's something that I wanted to show. This sounded interesting.
Following developing news out of Huntsville, where an evacuation was ordered overnight at the oldest prison in Texas.
You know, it had to be some dramatic moments there in the middle of the night. We're told that fire broke out at the Walls unit around 2 o'clock this morning. Shelby Rose made herself that way. She's outside the prison where officials held a news conference just a little over an hour ago. Shelby, what'd you find out?
Well, crews have been out here for more than 5 hours now, but I will say this fire is contained. We don't see any more smoke coming from the top of the building, which is a completely different story than when we got here a couple hours ago. But you can just see the damage to the outside of that building right there. But the good news to report is there were no injuries to either staff or inmates here overnight. Everyone was able to evacuate safely. Now, we're told the call came into the Huntsville Fire Department around 2:30 this morning, and when crews arrived just minutes later, flames were visible from both the West Building, which are cell blocks, as well as the Administration Building. And they immediately called in mutual aid. More than half a dozen other departments have been assisting, which includes 2 from Montgomery County. Now, a representative from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice tells us a total of 655 inmates were evacuated and taken to a secure location within the facility, which is about 40% of the population here. And we don't know the extent of the damage just yet and may not know for hours.
We may very well be out here till up in the day today, depending on what the mop-up operations look like once we get inside the cell block. We're inside the Administration Building right now trying to get that kind of cleaned up a little bit. Once we get over in that cell block, we'll have to see what that looks like.
And the cause of the fire is still unknown. All we've been told is that it may have started in the attics of these buildings, but we won't know a definitive cause of this fire until the Texas Fire Marshal's office does complete their investigation, which hasn't even started yet. Reporting live in Huntsville, Shelby Rose, Fox 26 News.
If it was in the attic, I would say it was probably some old electrical wiring. I mean, you know, you're looking at a lady who had her house, spontaneous combustion. There wasn't even any wires involved. So, you know, this is supposed to be the oldest prison in Texas. So that's my guess, unless there was something. It was the middle of the night. I was thinking maybe something from heat caused spontaneous combustion, but at night it's not that hot comparatively. This says new clues link BTK serial killer to cold case victim. This must be on the let's take a look.
Put himself from Ark City, Kansas, Cedarville, Coffeyville, Cherryville, Independence, all across the Oklahoma-Kansas border. And of course, he told us that was when he had his opportunities to be himself, have his hotel parties, do prowling, breaking and entering, different things, being away from home. That was something that he did. You know, in addition to that, he really talked about the Flint Hills, Otter Creek, different things in our area that are pretty significant and had a lot of knowledge about that.
How about his journal? I understand he had a journal entry involving a bad laundry day. And how did that tie into your investigation, your suspicions here?
Well, if it's okay with you, before that happened, when he was going through that story and showed that familiar with the area, we knew we were going to have to look at him. So we stopped the interview as he was going into his 10th murder. And as we were concluding, he told me I was in Oklahoma a lot in 1990. I worked for the U.S. Census, which was pretty shocking for me because I didn't know that. And he told me he was all over Oklahoma and Kansas through that period because he'd been laid off at ADT and had started for the census in '89 and worked for the census through 1990. And then as we concluded again, he told me about a fantasy that was his favorite that he never got to commit. And he told me that he always wanted to kidnap a girl from a laundromat. So I asked him, you know, if he'd ever got to do that fantasy, how he would do it. And he explained to me that he would have washed the laundromat till she was there by herself. And then he would have approached her with one of his rouges, got her to his vehicle, and he would have had her. Nobody would have seen or heard anything. So at that point, we concluded that, knew we had to go to Wichita, dig further. So through that information and some of his book that he was creating in 1976, he's got a project he called Bad Laundry Day. And in that notation, he has it marked for Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 of his book was his actual murder. So that started the investigation, of course, full ahead to try to find all the information we could, and we're still pursuing leads today.
So how close are you, do you think, to solving this cold case?
Well, again, we're hopeful. We're moving forward, looking into additional information. You know, of course, we didn't reach out to media. He had reached out to media on 2 previous occasions, and then someone had called the media over us being in Park City doing the dig, and it's continued. And of course, for not just our victim's family, but anybody that was a victim or survivor from those crimes, you know, we as law enforcement, we don't want to reopen those wounds and have the families relive those situations. You know, when a cold case can go cold again, or leads can't be found. So, you know, the victim's family as well, you know, they had no control. They're victims of this, just like the victim family members. So, you know, we've still got to keep investigating, but we've got actually a lot of really good information, and have made contact with numerous different people that have additional information that we think will hopefully lead us to be able to get an answer in our case, and maybe answers for some other agencies.
How important is it for you? It seems like this is one that's been with you a long time, and I think.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, when you have a young person that's abducted, and you know, years and years have went by with no answers, we want to get justice for that victim and for their family, and answers and closure. And that's our hopes, and we're going to pursue it as long as it takes, or as far as we can go, and hopefully get this finished and those answers found.
Sheriff, again, I'm going to reiterate how amazed I am that you're watching a program and you remember something from 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, that you investigated, but those facts remain there. And when you saw something, you put that together so quickly. The folks in Osage County are really lucky to have you, Sheriff. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Amazing, folks. I mean, and you see here from many members of law enforcement with these cold cases, they don't forget. They don't stop. It's like, I want to figure this out. I want to get justice for that family. And hopefully that happens. All right, we've got a lot more to get to. Up next.
The think tank joins us as we take a closer look at the evidence and potential new cases against BTK.
On record, yeah, my father's a huge narcissist. So he's a sexual sadistic psychopath and a pathological liar. And so he absolutely loves the attention.
That's Carrie Rawson talking about her dad. Her dad is BTK, Dennis Rader, the bind torture killer. New developments in this case. We spoke with the sheriff on one case. There's another case they're looking at. I'm trying to connect him to all of this. Let me read a statement from BTK's daughter. She released a long statement. So here's part of it. In January of 2023, I became aware of the missing person case of Cynthia Cindy Dawn Kinney, a 16-year-old cheerleader who disappeared from a laundromat on June 23rd, 1976 in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. In June of 2023, I became aware of the unsolved murder case of Shauna Garber, whose remains were found near Pineville, Missouri in December of 1990. I've returned since to the Osage County Sheriff's Office to work in a volunteer capacity as an active agent of law enforcement, assisting on these two cases, including visiting my father twice at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. Beyond these two cases that have been released publicly, I'm not at liberty to discuss other possible missing persons and unsolved murder cases that are being actively investigated as possibly committed by my father. This past spring, federal transaction immunity was offered to my father in the tri-state area by a federal district attorney's office to give my father a chance to confess to any other violent crimes he may have committed from roughly 1963 to 2005, giving decades-long grieving families long-sought answers. And in return, my father would not be charged in these cases. I will continue to partner closely and heartily support all law enforcement agencies and offer my volunteer assistance. Together daily, we can make a difference. Let's keep working together to solve these cases for these families. They deserve all that we can give them. We can join together to put our mark on modern interagency cooperation and modern forensics. And that's Carrie Rawson. Amazing. How she's been able to, do what she's doing in light of finding out who your dad is and what he did. Amazing. So here's a part of BTK's journal entry involving this so-called laundry day, right? Because you have one of the cases in Osage, a young woman was last seen at a laundromat across the street from where some work was being done by ADT. Now, at BE, and again, these are his words, so I don't know exactly what it means. At B or BE of house off 17th, had problem getting in or too much noise factor. The brunette was the target. I would watch nearby laundromat for possible victim. C9, hit PJ bad wash day. Laundromat were a good place to watch victims and dream. Sometime I have a pair of women underwear on, and after watching a girl or a lady, relieve myself in the bathroom with thoughts. Wow. Let's bring the think tank. Joining us tonight in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy. Also with us in Los Angeles, California, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. And in Phoenix, Arizona, criminal defense attorney and the lawyer who represented Jodi Arias, Kirk Nurmi. Great to see everyone tonight. What do you think here? It seems like he's not taking credit for these. Eklund, he was proudly standing up in court at one point, taking credit for murders. Do you think that he could be this sociopathic, that he would admit to some but not admit to others and not give those families an opportunity for an answer?
Well, I think his daughter is making it so hard for him. I have to acknowledge just how much bravery and courage it takes for Carrie Rawson to do what she's doing. As a criminal defense attorney, I know people who legitimately will lie on the stand or even not take the stand, exonerating live people just for the reputation of a dead person. So for her to stand up in real time and not condone her father's actions, not make excuses for it, but sincerely with all her heart try to find closure for families has got to be acknowledged, because cruel, hurting people, people that are scared and frightened, can potentially be some of the most cruelest people. And it's not their fault because it's justified. And for family members of people who are charged with these heinous crimes, for them to come out and really seek the truth is just admirable.
Absolutely. I'm with you. Nima, what are your thoughts here on this case? You saw that the feds were offering some level of immunity for a long period of time, 63 to 2005. What does your gut tell you here?
Well, Vinny, I mean, that's really important because in this case, he didn't have to face the death penalty because Kansas didn't have the death penalty until 1994. So when you start going into different states like Oklahoma and Missouri, some of which reinstated the death penalty as soon as the Supreme Court made it legal again in 1976, it can matter. Maybe, for one of these other victims, all of a sudden, this monster can be put to death. So these investigations are obviously important to the families of these missing victims, but also maybe get some justice that really has escaped one of the worst serial killers in U.S. history. The other important point I want to raise is, obviously, my heart goes out to the daughter and her bravery, but she was actually instrumental in finding and breaking this cold case open, because we've talked a lot about these familial DNA matches, right? Golden State Killer, Rex Heuermann in New York, and it was her pap smear in college that was, I believe, law enforcement got to and was able to match the DNA of one of the victims to her, and that's how this case broke wide open.
Kirk, I want you to take a listen to more of Kerry Rawson speaking with Matt Johnson here, talking about this particular murder.
If you will go back and look in these cases, he's actually saying he didn't do these. And for somebody like my dad, and honestly, somebody for Rex, in Rex's case, I don't see either of them ever claiming anything they didn't do.
So what do you think here, Kirk? Do you think he didn't do this and that's why he's not taking credit? Is it something else going on? Is there any reason for him to not take credit for a murder that he actually committed, being the sociopath that he is?
Yeah, I mean, his daughter mentioned it, that he was a psychosexual sociopath. And I think the other thing she said that was very important was the idea that he wants attention. If he would have took that plea, if he would have took the immunity and confessed, it would have been over. But now, instead of those 10 life terms behind bars, he's getting more attention. Maybe he's going to get another trial. Maybe he's open for the death penalty. Whatever it is, he has sick ends. And the attention that he gets, I think, feeds him. So this is something other than going and being in his jail 24/7. So he might very well want to challenge these charges so he gets a trial, gets attention.
Yeah, we haven't paid much attention to him recently. He tried to get everyone to pay attention to him when the Long Island serial killer was arrested and called him a copycat, sending those letters like he always does. So what do you think here, Eklund? Do you think at some point we're going to look at new charges here against BTK?
I don't know. I think that they need more. However, he's a sadist. So, you don't know what enjoyment he's searching for. Is he looking to be the center of the attention because it's not his body, or is he looking to be the center of attention so that they, force them to prove their case? So again, we are not dealing with a normal person. We're dealing with a sadist. So we don't know, and we won't know until he tells us.
Well, that was interesting. Take a quick look see if there's anything else on court TV about what's going on with Quanisha. Looks like no. Okay, well, I'm gonna try to monitor what's going on with Quanisha, and maybe I'll pop back on if I see anything. Interesting. I'm curious to see how they handle it if they delocate this witness, because I've never seen anything like this before. I mean, it's not to say that something like this hasn't happened in the course of jurisprudence, but since the current age of social media, and streaming trials, I've never heard of it. So, okay, well, I'll bid you a good afternoon, and if we have something interesting happen with Quanisha, maybe I'll pop on for that. So they said 9:30 for court on Monday. It's going to be the state's last witness, and then Dinky will start his defense. You are welcome, Matt. So, interesting developments in cases going on. So, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.